Tingyun, Jade, Lute, Reproach. Icy bamboo mat, silver bed, dreams won't come. Jade green sky like water, a few night clouds. Cries of a distant wild goose passing over Xiang River. 12 empty towers, the woman and the moon. So we move on to other poets in this section. This is a poem by Tingyun, and this is the fourth and last poem of his in the anthology, so we don't have to completely introduce the poet. You will remember that Tingyun is a late Tang poet who was famous for his slightly eccentric character. He didn't pass the GC examinations in spite of being very intelligent and very meritorious. He's also famous for being the first poet to seriously delve into the new form of the Zi, which was a poetic genre distinct and different from the Shi, that is the type of poetry included in this anthology. Now, the Zi would flourish in the next dynasty in the Song, and later on, well, not exactly the next one, but yeah, the next big dynasty. They started to be cultivated during the Tang Dynasty, but at that time they were a very minor and popular genre. Basically, songs for the sing-song girls in the taverns and the houses of pleasure. Tingyun is not the first poet to write Zi, but he is the first to take the form seriously, to develop it aesthetically and intellectually, and he is very well represented in the first important Zi anthology, Hua Qianqi Amongst the Flowers, which would be collected in the Five Dynasties period, right at the fall of the Tang, and he would have a very big influence in setting the form, at least in some aspects. So when Tingyun wrote Zi and wrote Shi, his Zi are his most popular poems, even though only a relatively small number of them has been preserved. I think about 40, maybe a little bit more. His Shi poetry has been preserved in bigger numbers, and it's very diverse. And we can see that in this anthology, like the three previous poems that we read, two of them were about traveling. Like we had a pentasyllabic regulated poem of his, which was Farewell to a Traveller Eastward Bound. So very typical for a scholar official poem. Then he has two heptasyllabic regulated poems. One of them also on separation, if not strictly on traveling, the Southern Ferry Dock at Lizhou. And the other one, historical reminiscence of a historical figure from the Han Dynasty that was forced to endure many years of exile amongst the barbarians, Su Wu's Memorial Temple. So this poem today, Jade, Lute, Reproach, pretty much adjusts much better to the stereotypical views of Wen Tingyun's poetry. So in his Zi, Wen Tingyun's poems are generally about, and this will ring a bell, languishing belles in luxurious surroundings that are pining away, static in their pain and in their loneliness, probably in a contrast with the greater dynamicism of the luxurious objects and space that surrounds the bell. As we've talked a lot of times, this was a type of poetry that had been very popular in the Six Dynasties as palace-style poetry, Kongtishi. The Tang had also cultivated it, but it would really rise to prominence again during the Sung Dynasty and basically in the Zhu genre, which would then develop other topics. But this sentimental, romantic, beautiful topic is always one that is slightly frowned upon, or more than slightly, by the orthodox Confucians, as they would consider it frivolous, superficial, sensual, and decadent. So in his Shi, his register, Wen Tingyun's register, is more varied than in his Zi, where his Zi poems are always love poetry, whether the forlorn beauty or the couple of lovers being together. In his Shi, he has more varied subject matter. There is an interweaving. Sometimes some critics say that he puts a bit of the Zi in the Shi and a bit of the Shi in the Zi. But basically, this poem that we read today is the one that really connects with what I imagine a stereotypical Chinese reader would expect of Wen Tingyun. So what's the topic of the poem? We've already said it. It's the lonely beauty, wakeful at night, in a luxurious setting, but suffering the pains, the pangs of loneliness, of separation from the beloved one. Interesting thing in the title, Jade, Lute, Reproach. The lute here is the th, which we've already encountered in a poem by Li Shangjing, which was the pattern, there it was translated the patterned lute or the patterned thither. Interestingly, in both cases, th is accompanied by a different adjective. So in the case of Li Shangjing's poem, the patterned lute means a lute that has been painted or decorated. In this case, the jade lute is not actually probably made of jade, but it means this type of lute, the same type of instrument as the previous one, has been inlaid with shiny pieces, probably of mother of pearl more than strictly jade. But anyway, it's a jade lute reproach, so we might imagine that this whole poem is supposed to be maybe sung by the forlorn beauty, as the exteriorization of her feelings, perhaps accompanying them by a jade lute, or perhaps the jade lute is the woman herself, who is a beautiful object-like treasure that is making reproaches, that is complaining at her loneliness. So let's look at the poem, couplet by couplet. It's I'm not sure if this is typical of Wen Tingyun. I haven't read enough of him to be sure, but Wen Tingyun uses, at least in this poem, a very juxtapository technique. Like, you don't get any sort of narration. Well, again, this is a quatrain, and quatrains are too brief to give anything but fleeting impressions. But the construction of this poem is really, it doesn't explicitly say this is a complaint of a woman who is alone. It uses a very indirect technique, which is painting images, so throwing images to the reader, and all of those images taken together are supposed to transmit the mood, the tone, the story of the sad, abandoned woman. And it's the objects and the sights and the sounds which indirectly are supposed to evoke in the reader that sort of a mood and tell the reader that this is the topic of the poem, and to more or less carve the background story that I have summarized a minute ago, which is a very conventional one, as I said, the pining woman who is alone in her luxurious boudoir and bedroom and surroundings. So let's look at the couplets then. First couplet, icy bamboo mat, silver bed, dreams won't come. Jade green sky, like water, a few night clouds. So the first line, as usual, you could say that the first couplet is expected to carve a little bit, to develop a little bit the background of the story. So the first line of the first couplet paints us the dormitory of a lady. And it focuses in two objects, icy bamboo mat, silver bed, both images of coldness and of intimacy. So we may imagine that the woman is on her bed. This bamboo mat, and when I first read the poem, I thought it might be, something on the floor, but probably this mat is part of the bedding. So the woman is implicitly, indirectly referenced through these cold objects that are in direct contact with her. So there's an icy bamboo mat. The iciness, the coldness, evokes also the coldness of her spiritual coldness at being alone. Silver bed, probably silver, maybe it's made of it's a luxurious bed of silver materials. Perhaps it's the moonlight whose silver rays are illuminating the bed and making it look silvery-like, or maybe it's both. Anyway, these two objects that transmit coldness and at-nightness, and then dreams won't come. The woman can't sleep. So we connect with the very frequently found sub-theme of wakefulness at night. Not only is it bad for the woman not to sleep because she can't sleep and she can't rest, and because she's thinking of her lover, there's also the element that the Chinese believe that in dreams, part of your soul, they believe you had two souls, the Hung and the Po, one of which was able at least to move around when you were unconscious. So this soul cannot go to the beloved one in sleep. So even that surcease of sorrow is denied to our protagonist. So the second line opens up the panorama. We go beyond the bedroom, and presumably the lady is looking out from a window, or maybe she has gone out into a terrace or a balcony or a courtyard. or is looking through a window. Jade green sky like water, a few night clouds. So the sky is jade green, an intense, dark, shiny color, like water, so indistinctness of sky and water. But just a few night clouds are moving around. I imagine these images are supposed to have some symbolism or some evocative power, but I really can't detect it. I imagine the poem is set in autumn. The geese in the third line will point in that direction, probably, but perhaps this jade green sky mixed with water is very typical of autumn anyway, and there are few night clouds. So it's a clear sky. Second couplet, so the second couplet continues the theme really, but it becomes less visual, not necessarily, maybe let me read the couplet. The couplet continues with these images, sensory impressions that are all contributing to this theatrical depiction of the lonely beauty. So second couplet, cries of a distant wild goose passing over Xiang River. 12 empty towers, the woman and the moon. So the third line includes a sound, so not a visual element, but an oral element, which is very typical in these poems. And it's the cries of a distant wild goose. So we don't know where the poem is set, but a wild goose is crying far away. Geese, they migrate in spring, I think spring and autumn. And the goose is passing over the Xiang River, which is a river in the south. So perhaps the woman, I'm not sure how to interpret this, perhaps it's a hyperbolic image, like the woman is very far away from the Xiang River, which is in the extreme south of China, well, middle south, and she seems to hear a goose crying over there, which would be, if she's living very far away, impossible, but maybe the goose, she thinks she hears that goose crying there, or she associates a goose that she is hearing with a goose from over there because perhaps her lover is there in the extreme south, or perhaps she is relatively close to the south herself anyway. But she hears the goose, and remember, a goose's cry is always sad melancholy. It evokes autumn, it evokes separation of lovers, sending messages of frustration at not being able to send a message to the loved one. And the last line goes back again into the visual. It has like three objects. No, the first is a multiple one. So 12 empty towers, the woman and the moon. So this is the final image that is supposed to wrap up the whole poem and to convey the idea of the lonely woman. So 12 empty towers. I think in other versions of this poem the idea is it's a 12-story tower, but probably this is just a conventional way of representing a luxurious building in which a woman of good background might languish. So we have these towers, they're empty, so conveying loneliness, melancholy, the woman, and the moon. So the moon is like her, lonely in the heavens. We've encountered this image, for example, in the Chang'e poem that we read a few days ago by Li Shangjing. So the woman as the moon as a metaphor for the woman herself, that is sad, beautiful, nocturnal, and lonely. So, and then also, it's also usually an autumn site, or emphasized in autumn poems. So we have the empty towers, the moon, and the woman, all of them meant to convey, along with the previous images, this fresco, this image of loneliness, sadness, pining for love, forlornness. So, pretty well crafted, aesthetically pleasing, rather conventional on the topic, take on the lonely belle.